The desert stretched endlessly in all directions, a canvas of scorched earth beneath an unforgiving sun. 3 miles south of the Kandahar perimeter, something was wrong. The dust cloud rising from the valley floor moved too deliberately, too purposefully for natural wind patterns. Through high-powered binoculars, Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Reeves studied the anomaly with growing unease. The particles swirled in a perfect spiral, defying physics, creating a column that seemed to pulse with its own rhythm. "Control, this is Overwatch 7, Reeves spoke into his radio, voice steady despite the knot forming in his stomach. "We have eyes on an unidentified atmospheric disturbance, grid reference 47902, requesting immediate analysis." The response crackled through static. "Overwatch 7, stand by for thermal imaging, dispatching Blackhawk squadron to investigate." But thermal showed nothing. No heat signatures, no mechanical explanations, just that impossible dust dancing like smoke from an ancient fire. The phenomenon had appeared exactly 47 minutes ago, and with each passing moment it grew more defined, more intentional. Local weather stations reported zero wind activity. Satellite imagery revealed no aircraft, no explosions, no logical source for the disturbance. Captain Alina Vasquez received the scramble order while cleaning her flight helmet in the mechanic's bay. The leather interior still bore the faint scent of her father's cologne, a ritual she'd maintained since inheriting his call sign 3 years ago. Raven, they called her, though never with the reverence the name had once commanded. Her father had been a legend. She was merely his daughter, flying in shadows too large to fill. The briefing was sparse, almost insultingly so. "Visual reconnaissance only," the operations officer had said, barely looking up from his clipboard. "Probably just some thermal inversion. Should be routine for someone of your experience level." The dismissal stung, but Raven kept her expression neutral. At 28, she'd logged more combat hours than most pilots saw in entire careers, yet somehow remained perpetually underestimated. Her colleagues saw her father's call sign and assumed nepotism. They saw her quiet demeanor and mistook it for uncertainty. They saw her gender and drew their own conclusions. 460 Black Hawks lifted off in formation, their rotors beating a familiar rhythm against the crystalline sky. Raven flew tail end Charlie, relegated to the position reserved for rookies and those deemed expendable. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd requested point position, knowing the terrain better than any pilot in the squadron, but had been overruled by Major Thompson, whose own flight hours barely exceeded her monthly average. As they approached the coordinates, something fundamental shifted in the air around them. The first Blackhawk began to descend toward the mysterious dust cloud, its pilot reporting normal instrument readings. Then, without warning, the aircraft froze mid-flight, suspended impossibly in the air as if caught in amber. The rotor blades continued spinning, but the helicopter itself remained motionless, defying every law of physics and aviation. "What the hell?" Major Thompson's voice crackled through the comm. "Bravo 1, respond. Bravo 1, do you copy?" Silence. The suspended Blackhawk hung in the air like a metal sculpture, its crew visible through the cockpit windows but completely unresponsive. Radio calls went unanswered. Visual signals were ignored. The helicopter had become a monument to the impossible, trapped in a moment that stretched beyond comprehension. Raven felt her heartbeat quicken, not from fear but from recognition. She'd seen this before, in classified reports her father had studied obsessively during his final years. Reports that had cost him his career when he tried to bring them to light. Reports that had been buried so deep that mentioning them became career suicide. "Control, this is Raven," she transmitted, her voice cutting through the panicked chatter on the radio. "I'm seeing a localized temporal displacement field. Recommend immediate withdrawal to safe distance." Major Thompson's response was sharp and dismissive. "Raven, maintain radio discipline. There's no such thing as temporal displacement. It's obviously some kind of electromagnetic interference." But even as he spoke, the second Blackhawk began to slow, its forward momentum gradually decreasing until it too hung motionless in the desert air. The pilot's voice grew distant, stretched like a recording played at half speed. Something's happening to time itself. The remaining two helicopters pulled back instinctively, their pilots suddenly aware they were witnessing something beyond their training, beyond their understanding. The dust cloud below continued its hypnotic spiral, and now they could see it wasn't dust at all. It was sand, individual grains suspended and controlled by an unseen force, creating patterns that seemed almost deliberate, almost intelligent. Raven's instruments began to fluctuate wildly. Compass needles spun freely, altimeters showed impossible readings, and her GPS signal fragmented into static. Through her headset, she heard fragments of voices, not from her squadron, but from somewhere else entirely. Voices speaking in languages she didn't recognize, reporting coordinates that didn't exist on any map. "This is Raven to all aircraft," she transmitted, her voice steady despite the chaos surrounding them. "I'm observing chronological anomalies consistent with theoretical temporal distortion. Request permission to establish a perimeter and begin systematic documentation." The response was immediate and harsh. "Negative, Raven. You're seeing equipment malfunction, nothing more. All aircraft will maintain current position and await further orders." But Raven had already begun her own analysis, her mind racing through possibilities her father had theorized about in his private journals. The journals she'd inherited along with his call sign, filled with calculations and observations that military brass had dismissed as the ravings of a burned-out pilot. Now, watching two aircraft hang frozen in impossible suspension, she realized her father had been right about everything. The third Blackhawk attempted to circle the phenomenon, its pilot apparently convinced he could find a logical explanation through traditional flight maneuvers. Within minutes, it too began to slow, its rotor wash creating strange patterns in the sand below. The crew's radio transmissions became increasingly fragmented, words stretching across seconds, then minutes, until they faded into an eerie silence that seemed to swallow all sound. Three helicopters now hung in the air like exhibits in some cosmic museum, their crews trapped in moments that refused to end. The dust cloud below had grown larger, more defined, and Raven could swear she saw shapes within it, geometric patterns that spoke of intelligence, of purpose, of something trying to communicate across the barriers of time and space. "Control, this is Raven," she transmitted, her voice the only clear signal in a sea of static. "I'm the only remaining aircraft capable of investigation. Request permission to proceed with reconnaissance." The long pause that followed told her everything she needed to know. They were afraid, not just of the phenomenon, but of what it might mean for everything they thought they understood about reality. Finally, Major Thompson's voice crackled through. "Raven, you will maintain safe distance and await backup. That's a direct order." But safe distance was a luxury they no longer possessed. The phenomenon was growing, expanding outward in concentric circles that seemed to pulse with their own heartbeat. Each pulse brought new impossibilities, fragments of aircraft that shouldn't exist, pieces of technology from decades past and future, voices speaking in temporal echoes that overlapped and intertwined. Raven made her decision. Banking away from the formation, she began her approach toward the suspended helicopters, her instruments screaming warnings she chose to ignore. Her father's voice seemed to whisper through the static. "Sometimes, Elena, the only way to understand the impossible is to embrace it." The desert below stretched endlessly, but now it held secrets that demanded answers. And Raven, carrying her father's call sign and his unfinished mission, was the only one left to find them. Her Blackhawk descended toward the temporal anomaly, rotors beating against air that seemed to thicken with each passing moment. The closer she got, the more she understood that this wasn't just a military incident. It was a doorway, a crack in the fabric of reality itself, and she was about to become the first human to step through it. The radio crackled one final time. "Raven, abort immediately. That's a direct order." But orders meant nothing in a world where time itself had become negotiable. Elena Vasquez, call sign Raven, daughter of a legend and keeper of impossible truths, pushed her aircraft forward into the unknown, ready to discover what lay beyond the boundaries of everything she'd ever believed possible. The desert wind carried whispers of the future, and Raven was finally ready to listen. As her helicopter approached the suspended aircraft, something extraordinary happened. The frozen Blackhawks began to move again, but not forward or backward. They rotated slowly, their noses turning toward her aircraft with deliberate precision. The crews inside were visible through the cockpit windows, their faces turned toward her with expressions of recognition, as if they'd been waiting for her arrival. "Raven," came a voice through her headset, clear and unmistakable despite the static. "We've been waiting for you." It was her father's voice, impossible and undeniable, speaking across the years from somewhere beyond the veil of linear time. The call sign she'd inherited wasn't just a name, it was a key, a genetic and spiritual lock that opened doors others couldn't even see. The dust cloud below began to form new patterns, spelling out coordinates in languages that predated human civilization. The suspended helicopters started to descend in perfect synchronization, their crews now fully responsive, their instruments functioning normally. But they weren't returning to their original time. They were moving forward, toward a moment that hadn't happened yet. Raven's training told her to retreat, to call for backup, to follow protocol. But her instincts, honed by years of flying and sharpened by her father's hidden legacy, told her something different. This wasn't an attack or an invasion. It was an invitation, extended across time itself to the one person capable of understanding its significance. She keyed her radio one final time. "Control, this is Raven. I'm going in." The response was immediate and panicked. "Raven, negative. Return to base immediately." But Elena Vasquez was already committed to a course that would change everything. Her helicopter joined the formation of suspended aircraft, and together they began their descent toward whatever lay hidden in the swirling sands below. The desert stretched endlessly in all directions, but now it held the promise of answers to questions humanity had never dared to ask. Time itself had become a river, and Raven was finally ready to navigate its currents. The chronometer on her dashboard began to spin wildly, numbers blurring together as seconds stretched into minutes, minutes compressed into heartbeats. Through her headset, she heard voices from across the decades, pilots who had vanished without trace, aircrew who had disappeared into legends, all of them speaking in unison. "Welcome home, Raven. Welcome to the truth." The phenomenon wasn't destroying time. It was revealing it, showing the connections that bound all moments together in an endless web of cause and effect. And Elena Vasquez, inheritor of impossible knowledge and keeper of her father's final mission, was about to become the first human to understand what it all meant. The desert wind carried the scent of distant storms and the promise of revelations that would reshape everything humanity thought it knew about reality. In the distance, more dust clouds were forming, each one a doorway to a different moment in time, and Raven realized she was looking at the most important discovery in human history. Her helicopter touched down in sand that felt solid and liquid simultaneously, and Elena Vasquez stepped out into air that hummed with possibilities. The suspended Blackhawks settled beside her, their crews emerging with faces full of wonder and recognition. They had been waiting for her, across years and decades, knowing that eventually the right person would arrive to unlock the secrets hidden in the desert's heart. The call sign, Raven, had never been just a name. It was a designation, a marker that identified those capable of navigating the spaces between moments, of understanding the language that time itself spoke to those brave enough to listen. And now, standing in sand that held the memories of every moment that had ever been or ever would be, Elena Vasquez finally understood her true purpose. The desert stretched endlessly in all directions, but for the first time in her life, Raven knew exactly where she was going. Above them, the sky began to change, clouds forming patterns that defied meteorology, spelling out messages in alphabets that wouldn't be invented for centuries. The temporal anomaly wasn't an isolated incident. It was the beginning of something much larger, a revelation that would force humanity to reconsider everything they thought they knew about the nature of existence itself. Elena Vasquez, call sign Raven, daughter of legends and keeper of impossible truths, stood at the center of it all, ready to guide her species into a future that existed beyond the boundaries of linear time. The desert wind whispered secrets in her ear, and for the first time in her life, she finally understood what it meant to be truly free. The transformation had begun, and there was no going back. Major Thompson's voice crackled through the radio one final time. "Raven, report your status immediately." But status reports belonged to a world governed by linear time, and Elena Vasquez now existed in a space where such concepts had no meaning. She was exactly where she needed to be, doing exactly what she had been born to do, carrying forward a mission that had been waiting for her since before she was born. The desert stretched endlessly in all directions, but it no longer felt empty. It felt full of possibilities, full of connections, full of the infinite potential that existed in the spaces between one moment and the next. And Raven, finally understanding her true nature, began to laugh, a sound that echoed across time itself, carrying with it the promise of revelations yet to come. The phenomenon was spreading, dust clouds forming at coordinates around the globe, each one a doorway to understanding, each one waiting for someone brave enough to step through. The world was about to change, and Elena Vasquez would be the one to show them how. In the distance, more helicopters appeared on the horizon, their crews drawn by something they couldn't name but couldn't ignore. The gathering had begun, and Raven stood at its center, ready to welcome them all into a truth that would reshape the very foundations of human understanding. The desert wind carried the scent of infinite tomorrows, and Elena Vasquez, call sign Raven, breathed it in like the first air of a new world. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of potential, pregnant with possibilities that existed beyond the boundaries of conventional thought. Raven stood in the center of it all, her father's call sign finally carrying the weight it had always been meant to bear, and she knew that everything that had come before had been preparation for this moment. The future was calling, and she was finally ready to answer. Time itself held its breath, waiting to see what humanity would do with the gift that had been placed in their hands. The desert stretched endlessly in all directions, but now it held the promise of infinite horizons, and Elena Vasquez, daughter of legends and keeper of impossible truths, was ready to explore them all. The transformation was complete, and the real adventure was just beginning. Standing in sand that sparkled with temporal energy, surrounded by aircraft that had transcended the limitations of linear time, Elena Vasquez finally understood the true meaning of her call sign. Ravens were messengers, creatures that could travel between worlds, carrying news of what lay beyond the veil of ordinary perception. And she, inheritor of her father's impossible legacy, was ready to deliver the most important message in human history. The desert wind whispered secrets in languages that hadn't been spoken for millennia, and Raven listened with the patience of someone who finally understood that some truths were worth waiting for. The world was about to change, and she would be the one to show them how to navigate the transformation. In the distance, storm clouds gathered on the horizon, but they brought rain that fell upward, toward a sky that held the memories of every moment that had ever been. The phenomenon was spreading, and Elena Vasquez stood at the center of it all, ready to guide humanity into a future that existed beyond the boundaries of everything they thought they knew about the nature of reality itself. The desert stretched endlessly in all directions, but for the first time in her life, Elena Vasquez knew exactly where she belonged. The radio crackled one final time with her father's voice. "Welcome home, Raven. The real mission starts now." And in the silence that followed, Alina Vasquez, call sign Raven, began to understand what it truly meant to be free. The endless desert had become a doorway, and she was finally ready to step through it into whatever lay beyond. The future was calling, and Alina Vasquez, daughter of legends and keeper of impossible truths, was ready to answer with everything she had. The transformation was complete, and the real adventure was just beginning. The temporal anomaly continued to expand, its influence spreading outward in concentric circles that seemed to pulse with the rhythm of some cosmic heartbeat. Each pulse brought new revelations, new connections, new understanding of the intricate web that connected all moments across time and space. Alina Vasquez stood at the center of it all, her consciousness expanding to encompass possibilities she had never imagined. Through her enhanced awareness, she could sense the presence of other temporal nodes forming across the globe, in the Australian outback, the Sahara Desert, the Gobi, the Atacama. Each location had been chosen for its isolation, its silence, its ability to serve as a resonance chamber for the frequencies that existed between moments. The phenomenon wasn't random. It was coordinated, orchestrated by an intelligence that operated on scales both vast and intimate. Her father's voice continued to whisper through the static. The call sign was never just a name, Alina. It was a genetic marker, a spiritual frequency that resonates with the temporal field. Only certain individuals can navigate the spaces between moments, and even fewer can serve as bridges between different temporal states. The suspended Blackhawks around her began to shimmer, their physical forms becoming translucent as they phased between different probability states. The crews inside were no longer trapped, they were exploring, their consciousnesses expanding to encompass multiple timelines simultaneously. They moved through their aircraft like ghosts, their forms flickering between past and future versions of themselves. "Raven," came a new voice through her headset, clear and authoritative. "This is Dr. Sarah Chen, Temporal Research Division. We've been monitoring the phenomenon from our facility in Nevada. Your genetic markers are off the charts. You're experiencing temporal integration at a rate we've never seen before." Alina felt a moment of confusion. She had never heard of a temporal research division, and the voice was speaking about concepts that shouldn't exist in official military doctrine. But then she realized that her expanding consciousness was allowing her to perceive communications from probability states that existed parallel to her own timeline. "Dr. Chen," Alina responded, her voice carrying across multiple temporal frequencies. "I'm seeing evidence of coordinated intelligence behind the phenomenon. This isn't a natural occurrence. It's a deliberate communication attempt from somewhere outside our normal space-time continuum." The response came from multiple timelines simultaneously. "Confirmed, Raven. We've been tracking similar signatures for decades. Your father was part of the original research team before the program was classified beyond even black project levels. He was trying to prove that consciousness itself could serve as a navigational tool for temporal exploration." Alina felt the pieces clicking into place. Her father's obsession with classified reports, his late-night conversations with officials who never existed in public records, his gradual withdrawal from active duty, it all made sense now. He hadn't been suffering from post-traumatic stress or paranoid delusions. He had been conducting research that challenged the fundamental assumptions of military and scientific establishments. The call sign, Raven, was assigned to him because of his ability to navigate between different temporal states, Dr. Chen continued. "When he passed it to you, he was passing on more than just a name. He was passing on a genetic and spiritual inheritance that only manifests under specific conditions." The dust cloud below began to form new patterns, more complex and detailed than before. Alina realized she was looking at a map, not of geographical locations, but of temporal coordinates. The swirling sand showed the connections between different moments in history, the causal threads that bound events across centuries and millennia. "I'm seeing the temporal map," Alina transmitted, her voice carrying across multiple probability states. "It's beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Every decision, every moment, every thought is connected to every other moment in an infinite web of causality." The suspended helicopters around her began to move again, but not through normal space. They were sliding along the temporal threads, their physical forms adapting to the requirements of trans-temporal navigation. The crews inside had become something new, not quite human, not quite machine, but a hybrid consciousness capable of existing in multiple time states simultaneously. "Raven," came her father's voice again, stronger now and more present. "You're about to make a choice that will determine the future of human consciousness. The phenomenon you're experiencing is an invitation from intelligences that exist beyond our normal temporal boundaries. They're offering humanity the opportunity to evolve beyond the limitations of linear time." Alina felt the weight of the decision pressing down on her. She could feel the presence of billions of minds across multiple timelines, all waiting for her choice. The temporal anomaly had made her a nexus point, a decision node that would determine which probability state humanity would inhabit. "What are the options?" she asked, her voice carrying across the vast network of temporal connections. "Evolution or extinction," came the response from multiple voices speaking in unison. "Consciousness expansion or consciousness collapse. The choice is yours, Alina Vasquez, call sign Raven, daughter of legends and keeper of impossible truths." The desert around her began to shimmer, reality becoming fluid and malleable. She could see the ghost images of civilizations that had faced similar choices throughout history. Some had chosen evolution and transcended their physical limitations. Others had chosen the safety of linear time and gradually faded into extinction. "I choose evolution," Alina said, her voice carrying across every timeline simultaneously. "I choose the future that exists beyond the boundaries of linear time." The response was immediate and overwhelming. The temporal anomaly exploded outward, its influence spreading across the globe in waves of pure consciousness. Every human mind touched by the phenomenon experienced a moment of expanded awareness, a glimpse of the infinite possibilities that existed beyond the limitations of conventional perception. Alina felt her consciousness expand beyond her physical form, becoming something vast and interconnected. She could perceive the thoughts and dreams of every human being simultaneously, could see the threads of causality that connected every moment across time and space. The call sign, Raven, took on new meaning. She had become a messenger between worlds, a bridge between the limited consciousness of linear time and the infinite awareness of temporal transcendence. The suspended Blackhawks around her completed their transformation, becoming vessels capable of navigating the spaces between moments. Their crews had evolved beyond the need for physical form, becoming pure consciousness capable of existing in multiple temporal states simultaneously. They would serve as guides for humanity's transition into its new evolutionary phase. "Welcome to the future, Raven," came the voice of the intelligences that had orchestrated the phenomenon. "Your species has chosen wisely. The real adventure is just beginning." Alina Vasquez, call sign Raven, daughter of legends and keeper of impossible truths, stood at the center of humanity's greatest transformation. The desert stretched endlessly in all directions, but now it held the promise of infinite horizons, and she was ready to explore them all. The future was calling, and humanity was finally ready to answer. The phenomenon continued to spread, temporal nodes forming at precise coordinates around the globe. Each node served as a gateway to expanded consciousness, a doorway through which humanity could step into its next evolutionary phase. The transformation would not be easy. It would require abandoning the safety of linear time and embracing the uncertainty of infinite possibility. But Alina Vasquez, standing in sand that sparkled with temporal energy, surrounded by aircraft that had transcended the limitations of physical reality, knew that humanity was ready for the challenge. The call sign, Raven, had prepared her for this moment, and she would serve as a guide for those brave enough to follow her into the unknown. The desert wind carried the scent of infinite tomorrows, and Alina Vasquez breathed it in like the first air of a new world. The transformation was complete, and the real adventure was just beginning. In the distance, more aircraft appeared on the horizon, their crews drawn by something they couldn't name but couldn't ignore. The gathering had begun, and Raven stood at its center, ready to welcome them all into a truth that would reshape the very foundations of human understanding. The future was calling, and Alina Vasquez, daughter of legends and keeper of impossible truths, was ready to answer with everything she had. The endless desert had become a doorway, and humanity was finally ready to step through it into whatever lay beyond. The transformation was complete, and the real adventure was just beginning. Time itself held its breath, waiting to see what humanity would do with the gift that had been placed in their hands. The desert stretched endlessly in all directions, but now it held the promise of infinite horizons, and Alina Vasquez, call sign Raven, was ready to explore them all. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of potential, pregnant with possibilities that existed beyond the boundaries of conventional thought. Raven stood in the center of it all, her father's call sign finally carrying the weight it had always been meant to bear, and she knew that everything that had come before had been preparation for this moment. The future was calling, and she was finally ready to answer. The transformation was complete, and the real adventure was just beginning.